My son sent me to a nursing home to sell my house, and I quietly signed all the papers. Later, he celebrated with his wife all week. But when they came to the notary for the keys, he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The notary's stamp hit the paper with a heavy thud. Done. My son Brandon let out a breath he must have been holding for months. He looked at his wife Tiffany and grinned the kind of grin a wolf gives when the lamb finally stops kicking. Dad. You did the right thing, Brandon said, patting my shoulder a little too hard. The car is outside to take you back to the facility. We will handle the rest. I sat there in my wheelchair, staring at the ink still wet on the page. My hands were shaking, but not because of old age and not because of the dementia they claimed I had. I was shaking with rage. They thought they had just won a $4 million lottery. They thought they had buried me alive. I looked up at Brandon, and for the first time in weeks, I dropped the act. I stopped trembling. I straightened my back, and I said in a voice as cold as the Chicago wind, "Enjoy the champagne, son, because you just signed your own prison sentence. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greedy plan, you need to understand how a father ends up declaring war on his own child. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what city you are watching from." I read every single one. It started exactly 14 days ago. It was the night of the ambush. I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table in my house in Lake Forest. The silence in the room was heavy. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A clock my late wife Catherine and I bought in Germany 30 years ago. It was 7:30 in the evening. They were 2 hours late. In the center of the table, the prime rib roast I had spent all afternoon preparing was sitting there cold. The fat had started to congeal around the edges. I had opened a bottle of Catherine's favorite Cabernet, allowing it to breathe just the way she liked it. Today was the 10th anniversary of her passing. I did not ask for much. I did not ask for gifts. I did not ask for pity. All I asked was for my son and his wife to sit with me to share a meal and to remember the woman who gave him life. I checked my phone again. No messages. My heart sank a little deeper into my chest. This house, this 4,000 square foot masterpiece of structural engineering, was built with my own hands. I designed the foundation. I calculated the load-bearing walls. Every beam and every brick held a memory of raising Brandon. I remembered him running down these stairs in his Batman pajamas. I remembered Catherine painting in the sunroom. Now the house felt like a museum, and I was the only exhibit left. Finally, I saw headlights sweep across the front windows. I heard the slam of car doors. No apology. No rush. The front door opened and Brandon walked in first. He was on his phone. He did not even look at me. He just pointed to the dining room and kept talking. "Yeah, I know the deadline is tight. I will get the funds. I promise, just give me a week." He hung up and shoved the phone into his pocket. He looked tired. His suit was expensive but rumpled, and his eyes were darting around the room like he was looking for an exit. Tiffany followed him in. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car. She looked around the dining room and wrinkled her nose. "It smells like old furniture and pot roast in here," she said. "Hello to you too, Tiffany," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Happy anniversary of Mom's passing." "Oh, right," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "That is today." "Sorry we are late, Larry." Traffic was a nightmare, and Brandon had a crisis at the office. "We cannot stay long." They sat down. I watched them. They did not look at the food. They did not look at the empty chair I had set for Catherine, with a single white rose on the plate. They looked at each other. There was a nervous energy between them, a secret language of glances and nods. I picked up the carving knife to slice the meat. So Brandon, I said, trying to bridge the gap. How is the firm? I saw your name in the paper last week about that new tech merger. Brandon cleared his throat. He did not meet my eyes. He reached down beside his chair and pulled up a black leather briefcase. He placed it on the table, right on top of the linen napkin, right next to the cold roast. Dad, you need to talk, he said. His voice was tight. We have been discussing your living situation. My hand froze on the knife. My living situation. I looked at him. What about it? I am perfectly fine, Brandon. I still drive. I still consult on engineering projects occasionally. I mowed the lawn yesterday. Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. You mowed the lawn? Larry, really? The neighbors called us. They said you missed half the grass and you were talking to yourself. You are 72 years old. This house is a monster. It is crumbling, and frankly, so are you. That stung. But I ignored her. I looked at my son. Brandon, what is this about? He unzipped the briefcase. The sound was like a zipper on a body bag. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. They were clipped together with a red tab. Dad, listen, he said, leaning forward. His tone changed. It became soft, patronizing, like he was talking to a toddler. We are worried about you. You are alone here. The upkeep cost of this place is eating into your savings. The property taxes in Lake Forest are skyrocketing. We do not want you to stress about money in your final years. Final years. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I am not dying, Brandon. No, but you are declining. Tiffany interjected. She reached over and tapped the papers. Look, we found a solution. A wonderful solution. It is a place called Serenity Pines. It is top tier, 5-star dining. Medical staff on call 24/7. It is basically a resort. I knew Serenity Pines. It was not a resort. It was a warehouse for the elderly, where families dumped their guilt so they could go on vacation without worrying if Grandpa fell down the stairs. I put the knife down. I am not going to a nursing home, I said firmly, and I am certainly not selling this house. This is Catherine's house. Brandon's face hardened. The mask of the concerned son slipped off. He pushed the papers across the table toward me. It is already in motion, Dad. I spoke to Dr. Evans. He agrees that your cognitive decline is accelerating. He has signed an affidavit stating you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs. I stared at him. Dr. Evans, my friend for 20 years. You got Jim to sign that. How? It does not matter how, Brandon snapped. What matters is that if you do not sign these papers voluntarily, we will have to do it the hard way. We will go to court. We will have you declared mentally incompetent. And then you will go to a state facility. Not Serenity Pines, a state facility, Dad. Do you know what those are like? He pulled a pen from his pocket and clicked it. The sound echoed in the silent room. The plan is simple. Brandon continued, his voice devoid of emotion. You sign the power of attorney. You sign the transfer deed. We sell the house. The market is hot right now. We have a buyer lined up, a developer who wants the land. The money pays for your care at Serenity Pines. We handle everything. You just need to rest. I looked at the papers. I looked at my son. I realized then that they had not come for dinner. They had come for an execution. They did not bring flowers for their mother. They brought a contract to erase her memory. But as I looked at Brandon, I noticed something. His hand was shaking, just a little, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Why was he in such a rush? Why did he have a buyer lined up already? A developer. My engineer brain kicked in. You do not rush a foundation unless the ground beneath you is sinking. Brandon was in trouble. Serious trouble. And he needed my house to save himself. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at him. "You want me to sign?" I asked quietly. "Yes, Dad," Brandon said, pushing the pen closer. "It is for your own good." I reached out and took the pen. I felt the weight of it. I knew that if I fought them now, right here at this table, they would drag me to court. They would humiliate me. They would win, but if I signed, if I played along, if I let them think they had won, I could get inside their operation. I could find out why he was sweating. I uncapped the pen. I lowered it to the paper. But inside my mind, the gears were turning. "You want the house, son. Okay, you can have the house, but you forgot one thing. You never checked the blueprints." I signed. Chào bạn, đây là phần tiếp theo của kịch bản phân cảnh 2 sự phản bội của y học. Tôi đã viết liền mạch tuân thủ nghiêm ngặt yêu cầu về độ dài văn phong, kể chuyện dòng chảy flow của AI, không sử dụng tiêu đề và loại bỏ các ký tự đặc biệt để đảm bảo giọng đọc cảm xúc nhất. Đây là nội dung tiếng Anh. I slammed my palms against the heavy oak table and forced myself to stand. The chair scraped loudly against the floorboards, echoing the sudden violence in the room. The exhaustion I had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get out!" I roared. My voice did not shake. It thundered with the authority of a man who had commanded construction sites for 40 years. "Get out of my house, Brandon. Take your wife and your briefcase and get out before I call the police and have you dragged out for trespassing. I am not senile. I am not an invalid. I am your father, and I own every single brick of this house." Tiffany gasped and clutched her pearl necklace, looking at me with wide, theatrical eyes, as if I were a rabid animal that had just snapped its leash. She stepped behind Brandon, using him as a shield. Brandon, however, did not flinch. He did not step back. He did not look ashamed. Instead, he looked at me with a calm, detached expression that was far more terrifying than anger. He slowly reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. His movements were precise and practiced. He pulled out a single folded sheet of paper and placed it gently on the table between us. He smoothed out the creases with his thumb. "Sit down, Dad," Brandon said quietly. "You are making a scene, and it is not good for your blood pressure. You want to talk about ownership. You want to talk about reality. Read this." I looked at the paper. I did not want to read it. My instincts were screaming at me to tear it up, but my engineer eyes automatically locked onto the header. It was a medical evaluation form. Official letterhead. I scanned the text and my breath caught in my throat. The words seemed to swim before my eyes. Diagnosis: advanced dementia. Stage 3. Patient exhibits paranoia, aggression, and significant cognitive decline. Patient is declared legally incompetent to manage financial or personal affairs. Immediate custodial care recommended. I looked at the bottom of the page. The signature was inked in blue. It was a signature I had seen 1,000 times on birthday cards and prescription pens. James Evans, MD, Jim. My knees felt weak, and I sank back into my chair. This was impossible. Jim Evans was not just my doctor. He was my best friend. We had played golf every Sunday for 20 years. We had grilled steaks in this very backyard while our wives drank wine. I had trusted him with my life. Last week, during my checkup, he had told me I was as fit as a fiddle for a man of my age. He had laughed and slapped my back. "This is a forgery," I whispered. My voice sounded small in the large room. "Jim would never sign this. You faked it." Brandon sighed and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and placed it on the table on speakerphone. "Call him," he said. "Ask him yourself." I stared at the phone. The dial tone purred. I reached out with a trembling hand and pressed the contact for Jim. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I prayed he would not answer. I prayed this was all a sick joke. "Hello?" Jim's voice came through the speaker. It sounded hollow, tired. "Jim, it is Larry," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "I am sitting here with Brandon. He has a paper, Jim. It says I have dementia. It says I am incompetent. Tell him it is a mistake. Tell him you never signed this." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear Jim breathing. I could hear the background noise of a television. "Jim," I said again, louder this time. "Tell him." "I am sorry, Larry." The voice was barely a whisper. "I am so sorry." "What do you mean you are sorry?" I shouted. "Why did you do this? They have me, Larry." Jim's voice cracked. "I made some bad investments. I owe people a lot of money. Brandon bought my debt. He said he would forgive it if I signed the paper. I have to think about my family, Larry. I am sorry." The line went dead. I stared at the black screen of the phone. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. My own son had blackmailed my best friend to declare me insane. I looked up at Brandon. He was smiling now. A small, victorious smile. He picked up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "You see, Dad," Brandon said, crossing his arms. "You are completely isolated. No one will believe you. If you go to the police, I will show them this medical report. I will tell them you are having an episode. They will not arrest me. They will strap you to a gurney and take you away." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I looked around the room. The familiar walls of my home suddenly felt like the walls of a prison. I was trapped. "So here is your choice," Brandon continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You can sign the papers to sell the house and check yourself into Serenity Pines voluntarily. You will have a private room. You will have cable TV. You will be comfortable. Or—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Or I call 911 right now. I tell them you are violent and out of control. With Dr. Evans's report, they will bypass the private facilities. They will take you straight to the state psychiatric ward. Have you ever seen the state ward, Dad? It is a hellhole. You will be in a room with 10 other screaming lunatics. You will be sedated 24 hours a day. You will lie in your own filth until you die. And I will still sell the house." I looked at Tiffany. She was checking her manicure, bored with the conversation. I looked at Brandon. I saw no love in his eyes, only calculation, only greed. I realized then that my son was gone. The boy I had raised was dead. Sitting across from me was a monster who would stop at nothing to get his hands on $4 million. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might fail. But my mind was suddenly crystal clear. If I fought him now, I would lose. I would end up in the state ward, drugged and silenced forever. I needed time. I needed to get to a place where I could think, where I could plan. Serenity Pines was a prison, but it was a comfortable prison. And prisons have escape routes. I took a deep breath. I forced my shoulders to slump. I let the fire in my eyes die down, replacing it with the dull look of a defeated old man. "Give me the pen," I said quietly. Brandon's smile widened. "That is a smart decision, Dad." I took the pen. I looked at the contract. I signed my name. But as the ink flowed onto the paper, I made a vow to myself. "You think you have won, Brandon. You think you have checkmated me. But the game has only just begun. You just moved your king into a trap. And I promise you, son, I will be the one who celebrates when this is over." The sun had barely risen over Lake Forest when the nightmare began. I was sitting in my kitchen, wearing my silk robe, nursing a cup of black coffee, and looking out at the garden Catherine had planted. I was trying to formulate a plan, trying to figure out which lawyer to call first. I never got the chance to make that call. The front door did not open, it exploded inward. I spun around in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. Two men marched into my kitchen. They were enormous. They wore blue scrubs that looked more like prison uniforms than medical attire. They had thick necks and faces devoid of any human emotion. They did not knock. They did not introduce themselves. They simply moved toward me with the terrifying efficiency of a demolition crew. Mr. Bennett, one of them, said, his voice flat and gravelly, "It is time to go." I stood up, my hands trembling not from age but from a sudden primal fear. "Who are you?" I demanded, gripping the edge of the granite counter. "Get out of my house." I did not call for anyone. "We are from the transport service," the man replied, not stopping. "Your guardian has authorized an immediate transfer. Please do not resist, sir. It will only make this harder for you." Before I could reach for the phone on the wall, the second man was already there. He ripped the cord out of the jack with a casual motion. Then they were on me. Big, heavy hands clamped onto my arms. They were not gentle. They did not treat me like a patient. They treated me like a package, a piece of cargo that needed to be moved from point A to point B. I struggled. I am 72 years old, but I worked construction my whole life. I still have strength in these shoulders. I planted my feet and twisted, trying to break their grip. "I am not going anywhere," I shouted. "Let go of me." That was when Tiffany walked in. She was wearing a jogging suit, holding a steaming latte, looking as if this was just another mundane Tuesday morning. She watched the two giants manhandling me with a look of mild annoyance. "Stop making a scene, Larry," she said, sipping her coffee. "You are embarrassing yourself. Just go with them. Brandon is already at the office handling the paperwork." I looked at her, at the coldness in her eyes. I realized she was enjoying this. For 10 years, she had felt small in this house, overshadowed by the memory of my wife and my success. Now she was finally the one in charge. My eyes darted to the hallway table. There, sitting in a silver frame, was the last photo I ever took of Catherine. She was smiling, the wind catching her hair on our trip to calmness. I needed it. If I was going into hell, I needed her with me. I lunged forward, breaking one arm free for a split second. I reached for the frame. My fingers brushed the cool silver. I had it. I pulled it to my chest, clutching it like a lifeline. But Tiffany was faster than I expected. She stepped forward and snatched the frame from my hands. Her fingernails scratched my skin, but she did not care. "No personal items," she hissed. She walked over to a cardboard box sitting by the door, a box destined for the trash or charity. She held the photo over it. "Tiffany, please," I begged. My dignity was gone. I was just a husband wanting his wife. "Please, just let me have the picture. I will go quietly. Just give me Catherine." She looked at the photo, then looked at me. A cruel little smile played on her lips. "You do not need this trash where you are going, Larry. You need to focus on the future, not the past." She dropped the frame into the box. I heard the glass crack. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silence of the hallway. Something inside me broke along with that glass. I stopped fighting. The two men dragged me out the front door, down the stone steps I had laid with my own hands, and toward a white van waiting in the driveway. It had no windows in the back. It looked like a dog catcher's truck. They shoved me inside. The interior was stripped bare. Metal benches, hooks on the floor for restraints. A partition of thick plexiglass separated the back from the driver's seat. I sat on the cold metal bench as the doors slammed shut, pushing me into semi-darkness. I heard the heavy clank of a deadbolt sliding home. I was a prisoner. The engine roared to life. I scrambled to the partition, pounding on the glass. The driver was a young man wearing headphones, bobbing his head to music I could not hear. "Listen to me," I yelled, my voice echoing in the small metal box. My name is Lawrence Bennett. I have money. I have cash in a safe deposit box. I will give you $10,000 right now if you turn this van around. $10,000, son. Just open the door. The driver did not even turn around. He could not hear me or he did not care. To him, I was just another senile old man ranting about imaginary fortunes. I sank back onto the bench as the van lurched forward. I felt every bump in the road. I closed my eyes and tried to map the route in my head. Left onto Sheridan Road, right onto the highway. We were heading west. West meant away from the lake, away from the expensive neighborhoods, away from civilization. We drove for 2 hours. The air in the back of the van grew hot and stale. My throat was parched. I thought about the prime rib from last night. I thought about the unfinished coffee. I thought about Catherine's cracked photo in a box of trash. Finally, the van slowed. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. I pressed my face against the small mesh-covered window in the rear door, trying to see where we were. Oh, my heart stopped. The brochure Brandon had shown me featured a sprawling Victorian mansion with green lawns and white gazebos. It looked like a country club. This place was not a country club. It was a fortress. A 12-foot chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, topped with coils of razor wire that glinted maliciously in the sun. The building itself was a brutalist block of gray concrete stained with years of neglect. The windows were narrow and barred. There was no sign that said Serenity Pines. There was only a heavy iron gate that slid open with a metallic screech to swallow the van. This was not a nursing home. This was a holding pen, a place where people were sent to be forgotten. The van stopped in a loading bay that smelled of diesel fumes and bleach. The doors opened, and the 2 men were there again, pulling me out before I could get my bearings. They marched me through a service entrance and into a room with bright, buzzing fluorescent lights. A woman sat behind a high counter. She wore a pristine white uniform, but her face was hard like chiseled granite. She did not look up as they shoved me toward her. Name, she asked, typing on a keyboard. Bennett Lawrence, I answered automatically, my voice raspy. I want to speak to a lawyer. I am being held against my will. This is kidnapping. Processing, she said, ignoring me completely. Empty your pockets. I stepped back. No, I am not giving you anything until I make a call. The 2 men stepped closer. The threat was clear. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet, my leather wallet that I had carried for 15 years. She took it and dumped the contents into a plastic bag. My credit cards, my driver's license, the folded $20 bill I kept for luck. Watch, she commanded. I covered my left wrist with my right hand. It was a Patek Philippe, a retirement gift to myself. It was worth more than this woman made in 5 years. No, I said firmly. This is mine. One of the orderlies grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back with agonizing force. I cried out in pain. The other man deftly unclasped the watch and handed it to the woman. She dropped it into the bag with a clatter. Phone, she said. I hesitated. My phone was my only link to the outside world. My only hope of calling Henderson. I do not have it. I lied. The orderly patted me down. He reached into my robe pocket and pulled out the smartphone. He smirked and tossed it to the woman. All items confiscated for safekeeping, per guardian instructions, she droned. Now I was truly naked. No ID, no money, no time, no communication. I am not staying here, I shouted, my panic finally boiling over into rage. I am Lawrence Bennett. I built the skyline of Chicago. You cannot do this to me. I tried to push past the orderlies toward the door. It was a foolish move. Restrain him, the woman said without looking up from her screen. Level 1 sedation. The men grabbed me. I fought. I kicked. I bit. For a moment I was not an old man. I was a wild animal fighting for its life, but they were too strong. They slammed me face down onto a gurney. I felt the cold vinyl against my cheek. "Hold him still," a voice said from above. I felt a pinch in my upper arm. A needle. "No," I gasped. "No drugs. Please." The liquid fire spread through my veins instantly. My struggles weakened. The bright fluorescent lights above me began to blur and stretch. The sound of the woman typing faded into a rhythmic, distant tapping. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me completely was the plastic bag sitting on the counter. My watch, my life, sealed away. "Mr. Bennett," the woman's voice echoed as if from the bottom of a well. "Welcome to Serenity Pines. Sleep now." And then there was nothing but the terrifying silence of the void. I opened my eyes, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was not the smell of lavender and fresh linen that the glossy brochure for Serenity Pines had promised. It was a thick, suffocating stench of ammonia-boiled cabbage and human decay. My head felt like it was stuffed with wet cotton. The sedative they had forced into my arm yesterday had left a metallic taste in my mouth that made me want to retch. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy and foreign, as if gravity had doubled overnight. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my vision. I was in a room, but it looked more like a storage closet. The walls were painted a depressing shade of institutional beige that was peeling in the corners to reveal gray concrete underneath. There was no window overlooking a garden. There was only a narrow slit of glass near the ceiling, barred with iron grates that let in a sliver of gray light. To my right, there was another bed. In it lay a man who looked less like a human being and more like a pile of bones draped in a thin sheet. His mouth was open, and a thin line of drool ran down his chin. He stared at the ceiling with eyes that saw nothing. The rhythmic wheezing of his breath was the only sound in the room. A machine next to him beeped softly, counting the seconds of a life that had effectively ended years ago. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the drug-induced haze. This was not a luxury facility. This was a waiting room for death. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My bare feet touched the cold linoleum floor, which was sticky with something I did not want to identify. I was wearing a hospital gown that was too small for me open at the back, stripping me of the last shred of my dignity. "I need to get out of here," I whispered to myself. My voice was a croak. I spotted a red button on the wall near the door. The call light. I stumbled toward it, using the wall for support. My legs were trembling. The muscles that had carried steel beams and climbed scaffolding were now weak as water. I reached the button and pressed it. I pressed it again, and again. I slammed my hand against it until my palm hurt. I waited. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The man in the other bed let out a low moan, a sound of pure misery that made my skin crawl. Finally, the heavy metal door clicked and swung open. A woman stepped in. She was tall, with broad shoulders and hair pulled back so tight it pulled the skin of her face taut. She wore a pristine white uniform that was so starched it crackled when she moved. Her name tag read, "Head Nurse Gable." She looked at me not with concern, but with the annoyance of a zookeeper whose animal had woken up too early. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "You are up. You should be resting. The doctor ordered bed rest for your transition period." I drew myself up to my full height, which was 6'2". I tried to summon the commanding presence I used to have in the boardroom. "I want to see the director," I demanded. My voice was stronger now, fueled by anger. "I want to see the director immediately. There has been a mistake. I am being held here against my will. This facility is a fraud. Look at this room. Look at that man. This is a violation of basic human rights." Nurse Gable did not blink. She walked over to the foot of my bed and picked up a clipboard. She scanned it calmly, ignoring my outburst. "There is no mistake, Mr. Bennett," she said without looking up. "Your son Brandon processed your admission yesterday. He signed the premium care package." "Premium care," I shouted, pointing at the dying man next to me. "Is this premium care? I want to use a phone. I am calling my lawyer. I am calling the police." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were like black glass. She smiled a practiced, mechanical smile that did not reach those cold eyes. "I am afraid that is not possible," she said smoothly. "Your son is your legal guardian. He has invoked the isolation protocol for your own safety. He believes that outside stimuli are causing your agitation and paranoia. All communication must go through him. You have no phone privileges. You have no visitation rights unless approved by him. You are here to heal Mr. Bennett, not to conduct business." My blood ran cold. Isolation protocol. It was a fancy way of saying solitary confinement. Brandon had thought of everything. He had locked me in a box and thrown away the key. "I am not paranoid," I said, stepping closer to her. "I am a structural engineer. I am perfectly sane. And if you do not let me make a phone call, I will tear this place apart, brick by brick. Do you hear me?" Gable sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a walkie-talkie. "Orderlies to room 304, she said into the device. "We have a code yellow. Patient is aggressive." 2 seconds later, the door burst open and 2 men in blue scrubs appeared. They were not the same men who brought me here, but they were cut from the same cloth. Big, silent, threatening. "Get back in bed, Mr. Bennett," Gable ordered, pointing a finger at the mattress. "Or we will have to restrain you again. And I do not think you want another injection, do you?" I looked at the orderlies, then at Gable. I realized then that physical force was useless. I was outnumbered and overpowered. If I fought, I would be drugged. If I was drugged, I could not think. And if I could not think, I would die here. I slowly backed away and sat on the edge of the bed. "Good," Gable said. She nodded to the orderlies, and they stepped back but stayed in the doorway. "Now it is time for your morning medication." She pulled a small paper cup from her pocket. Inside were 3 pills, 2 blue ones and a large white one. "What are these?" I asked, eyeing the pills suspiciously. "Vitamins," she said, "and something to help with your anxiety. It will help you adjust." Dr. Evans prescribed them. I knew Dr. Evans. I knew he had betrayed me. And I knew that whatever was in that cup was not vitamins. I looked at the roommate in the other bed. The emptiness in his eyes. The slack jaw. Suddenly, it all made sense. The silence in the hallway. The lack of complaints from the other patients. They were not treating us. They were erasing us. These pills were chemical lobotomies designed to turn us into docile vegetables so they could bill our insurance and drain our bank accounts without resistance. If I swallowed these pills, I would become like the man in the next bed. I would forget my house. I would forget Catherine. I would forget my name. "Take them," Gable said, holding the cup out. "Now." I reached out and took the cup. My hand was steady. I knew I had to act. I had to play their game better than they did. I looked at Gable. I let my shoulders slump. I let a look of resignation wash over my face. "Fine," I whispered. "You win. I just want to sleep." I tossed the pills into my mouth, but I did not swallow. I used an old trick I had learned from a documentary about prison life. I lifted my tongue and lodged the pills securely underneath it, in the soft pocket of flesh. I grabbed the cup of water she offered and took a big gulp, swallowing the liquid, but keeping the pills trapped. I opened my mouth to show her. It was empty. "Good boy," Gable said condescendingly. She patted my cheek a touch that made my skin crawl. "See, was that so hard? The medication will kick in soon. You will feel much better. Just relax, Mr. Bennett. This is your home now." She turned and marched out of the room, followed by her muscle. The heavy door clicked shut and the lock engaged. As soon as they were gone, I scrambled off the bed. I ran to the small sink in the corner and spat the pills into my hand. They were already starting to dissolve, bitter and chalky. I looked at them with hatred. I could not flush them down the toilet. They might check. I could not throw them in the trash. They would find them. I looked around the room frantically. My eyes landed on the mattress. It was an old, cheap mattress with a small tear in the seam near the headboard. I hurried over and used my fingernail to widen the tear. I shoved the 3 pills deep into the stuffing of the mattress, pushing them in as far as my finger would go. Then I smoothed the fabric back down. I sat back on the bed, my heart racing. I had won the first battle. I was still awake. I was still me. I looked at my roommate again. "I promise you," I whispered to the unconscious man, "I am not going to end up like you." I lay back on the pillow and closed my eyes, waiting. I had to wait for the night. I had to wait for a mistake. I was trapped in a cage of wolves, but they did not know one thing. I was not a sheep. I was a wolf who was just biding his time. And tonight I would start hunting for a way out. 1 week. That is how long I had been rotting in that concrete box. 7 days of hiding pills in the mattress seam. 7 days of staring at the damp stain on the ceiling that looked like a weeping eye. 7 days of listening to the wheezing breath of the dying man in the bed next to me. I had become an actor on a stage of misery. I perfected the shuffle. I let my hands tremble constantly. I taught myself to stare blankly at walls with my mouth slightly open. I became the ghost they wanted me to be. The staff stopped looking at me with suspicion and started looking at me with pity. That was exactly what I needed. Invisibility is a weapon when you are surrounded by enemies. Then came the visitation day. I was wheeled into the guest lounge, a room with fake potted plants and chairs that smelled of stale coffee. I sat there waiting. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. I knew why they were coming. They did not want to see how I was doing. They wanted to see if I was broken yet. The double doors swung open, and the scent of expensive perfume cut through the smell of disinfectant like a knife. Brandon walked in first. He looked sharper than usual in a tailored navy suit, but his energy was frantic. His eyes darted around the room, scanning the corners as if he expected someone to jump out at him. Tiffany was right behind him. She was smiling that plastic smile I had come to loathe. But then I saw it. The detail that made my blood boil in my veins. Around her neck, resting against her silk blouse, was a string of pearls. Not just any pearls. They were South Sea pearls, the ones I had bought for Catherine on our 30th anniversary. I remembered the day I gave them to her. We were in a small bistro in Paris. She had cried. She said they were too precious to wear every day. She kept them in a velvet box in the safe. And here was this woman wearing them to a nursing home like cheap costume jewelry. It took every ounce of my will not to launch myself out of the wheelchair and rip them off her neck. But I stayed still. I let my head loll to the side. I played the part, Dad Brandon said, sitting down across from me. He placed a heavy hand on my knee. "You look rested. The doctors say you are adjusting well." I looked at him with glassy eyes. "I am tired, son," I mumbled, slurring my words intentionally. "I just want to go home." "When can I go home?" "We know, Dad," Tiffany said. She sat next to him and patted my hand. Her skin was cold. "That is why we are here. We just need to finalize a few things. To make sure you are taken care of. Once we sell the house, we can move you to the private suite. Remember, the one with the garden view. You would like that, wouldn't you, Larry?" She reached into her designer bag and pulled out another folder. More papers. "We just need your signature on these asset transfer forms," Brandon said. His voice was rushed. "It allows us to liquidate the stocks and bonds to pay for your long-term care. The house sale takes time, Dad. We need cash flow now to keep you here. I looked at the papers. It was a transfer of my entire investment portfolio, my life savings. He wanted to drain me dry before the house was even sold. I picked up the pen. I made my hand shake violently. I dropped the pen once just to sell the performance. Brandon watched me with hungry eyes. I could see the greed radiating off him. He did not see a father. He saw a piggy bank that he was finally breaking open. "Where do I sign?" I asked weakly. "Right here," Dad, Brandon said, pointing to the line. His finger was trembling. I scribbled a messy signature. It was barely legible, but it was enough. Brandon snatched the paper away as soon as the pen lifted. He exhaled a breath he must have been holding for minutes. "Good," he said. "Good. This will help." Then Tiffany stood up. She smoothed her skirt. "I need to use the ladies' room," she announced, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. "Don't go anywhere, Larry." She laughed a short, cruel laugh at her own joke and walked away. The moment she was gone, the air in the room changed. Brandon was alone with me. He stopped smiling. He slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. He looked exhausted. He looked terrified. Then his phone buzzed. It was vibrating against the wooden table aggressively. Brandon looked at the screen and all the color drained from his face. It was a pale gray terror that I had never seen on him before. He snatched the phone up. He looked at me. He saw a senile old man staring at the floor. He thought he was safe. He thought I was too far gone to understand. He stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to me. He answered the phone. I sharpened my hearing, focusing like a laser beam. I held my breath. "Look, I told you I have the papers," he whispered, his voice trembling with panic. "I just got the signature. I am going to the bank this afternoon. The liquid assets are worth at least $500,000. He paused, listening to the person on the other end, his shoulders hunched up defensively. "No, please," he hissed. "Listen to me. The house closes in 3 days. That covers the rest of the debt. I swear. Do not touch her. Please do not come to the house if my wife finds out." He stopped. He was listening again. "I understand," he said. His voice was broken. "Friday. I will have it all by Friday. Just call off your guys. Please." He hung up. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass of the window, breathing heavily. I saw his reflection. He looked like a cornered rat. My mind was racing. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. The rush to sell the house. The forgery of the medical records. The desperation for cash. Brandon was not just greedy. He was drowning. He owed money to dangerous people. Sharks. The kind of people who did not send demand letters but sent men to break legs. He was not protecting me. He was trying to save his own skin. He was sacrificing his father to pay for his sins. He turned back around. He composed his face, masking the terror with a thin veneer of arrogance. But I saw through it. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the way his hands shook as he put the phone back in his pocket. Tiffany came back into the room. "Ready to go, honey?" she asked. Brandon jumped. He forced a smile, but it looked like a grimace. "Yeah, let's go. We have a lot to do." He grabbed the folder with my signature. He did not say goodbye to me. He did not look back. He just walked out of that room as if the building was on fire. I sat there in the silence of the lounge. The fake ficus tree cast a shadow on the floor. And for the first time in a week, I smiled. A real cold smile. Because now I knew. I had found the crack in the foundation. He was on a deadline. Friday. He needed the money by Friday, or he was a dead man. And deadlines make people make mistakes. Deadlines make people desperate. He thought he was the player moving the chess pieces. But he didn't realize that he was already in checkmate. He needed the house sale to close. He needed that money, and I was the only one who could stop it. I waited until I was sure they were gone. Then I wheeled myself over to the nursing station where the young nurse Maria was working. She was the one with the sad eyes, the one I had heard crying about her mother's medical bills. It was time to make my move. It was time to buy an ally. I looked at her name tag. Maria. I cleared my throat, dropping the senile act for just a second. Maria, I said softly. My voice was clear and steady. I need a favor, and I think I can help you with your mother's bills if you help me. She looked up, startled. She looked into my eyes and saw that the fog was gone. I am not crazy, Maria, I whispered, and I am going to make you an offer you cannot refuse. Tonight, when the lights go out, come to room 304. The hunt was on. I waited until the elevator doors dinged and slid shut, swallowing my son and his wife. The moment they were gone, the mask of the feeble old man dropped from my face. I did not have much time. The receptionist was on a bathroom break, and the hallway was temporarily empty save for a janitor buffing the floor at the far end. I gripped the wheels of my chair. My hands, which had been shaking uncontrollably just moments ago, were now steady as granite. I pushed forward. I did not go back to my room. Instead, I wheeled myself toward the main lobby entrance where they had just exited. I had to see where they were going. I had to know if they were coming back. But more importantly, I had seen something. During their argument in the hallway just before they left, I had watched from the crack in the lounge door. I saw Tiffany stop near the large decorative trash can by the security desk. She had been digging through her purse, frantically searching for her car keys. In her haste, she had pulled out a crumpled ball of yellow paper. She looked at it with pure venom, as if the paper itself had offended her. She said something to Brandon, something sharp and vicious, and then she tossed the ball into the trash. It was a small action, a meaningless gesture to anyone else. But I was an engineer. I spent my life looking for cracks in the foundation, for small details that signaled a collapse, and that yellow paper looked like a crack. I reached the lobby. The automatic doors were still sliding open and closed, triggered by the wind. Through the glass, I saw Brandon's luxury SUV peeling out of the parking lot. They were gone. I looked around. The coast was clear. I wheeled myself over to the trash can. It was one of those tall, sleek metal ones with a small opening at the top. I looked down into the darkness. It was mostly empty, just a few empty coffee cups and some discarded flyers. And there, right on top, was the yellow ball of paper. I reached. My shoulder hurt as I stretched, but I ignored the pain. My fingers brushed the rough paper. I grabbed it. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat on my lap, covering it with my hands so the security camera in the corner would not see. I looked down at the document. It was wrinkled and stained with a smudge of lipstick, but the text was clear. It was not a receipt. It was not a shopping list. It was a legal notice. My eyes scanned the header. State of Nevada, Clark County, Superior Court. It was a summons. But it was not just a summons. Stapled to the back was a collection notice from a company called Desert Rock Holdings, LLC. I knew that name. I read the business news. Desert Rock was a shell company, a front. It was the legitimate face of the Silver Spade, an underground high-stakes casino in Las Vegas that operated in the gray zones of the law. I read the numbers, and my breath hitched in my throat. Outstanding debt principal $2 million. Interest and penalties $300,000. Total due $2,300,000. I read the date. Final payment deadline Friday, October 13th. That was 3 days from now. I read the threatening text at the bottom written in bold red letters. Failure to remit full payment will result in immediate seizure of collateral assets and further enforcement actions as per the private lending agreement. Collateral assets. Enforcement actions. Those were polite legal words for violence. I sat there in the lobby of the nursing home, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The puzzle pieces that had been floating in my mind finally slammed together into a terrifying picture. Brandon was not just expanding his business. He was not just having cash flow problems. He was drowning. He had gambled away everything. He had borrowed money from sharks to pay off the wolves, and now the sharks were circling. $2.3 million. That was exactly the amount he was trying to get from the quick sale of my house. He was selling my home not to put me in a better facility, but to save his own life. I looked at the paper again. Friday. If he did not have the money by Friday, these people would not sue him. They would hurt him. And a desperate man is a dangerous man. A chill went through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Brandon was cornered. If the house sale hit a snag, if the buyer backed out, if anything went wrong, he would not just give up. He would come for everything else. My stocks, my bonds, my life insurance. He would kill me. The thought was not paranoid. It was a mathematical certainty. I was worth more dead than alive to a man who owed $2 million to the mob. If I died tonight, he would inherit everything immediately. He could pay off the debt and still have money left over. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4 in the afternoon. Time was not just running out, it was gone. I crumpled the paper back up and shoved it deep into the pocket of my robe. I turned my wheelchair around. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had planned to wait. I had planned to gather more information. But I could not wait anymore. The timeline had shifted. I was not just fighting for my property, I was fighting for my survival. I needed to act tonight. I wheeled myself down the hallway past the nurse's station. Nurse Gable was back. She looked at me with her shark-like eyes. "Where have you been, Mr. Bennett?" she asked suspiciously. "I just wanted to see the sun," I mumbled, letting my head droop. "I missed the sun." She sneered. "Go back to your room, dinner is in an hour, and take your medication this time." I nodded obediently and shuffled away. But inside my mind was a whirlwind of calculation. I needed a phone, I needed a lawyer, I needed to stop the sale. I thought of Maria, the young nurse. I had seen her earlier looking at her own phone, crying silently in the break room. She was my only chance. I wheeled into my room. The smell of sickness hit me again, but this time I did not flinch. I went to my bed and sat down. My roommate was still staring at the ceiling, lost in his vegetative state. I pulled the yellow paper out of my pocket and looked at it one last time. This was my weapon. This was the proof. Brandon was not a guardian acting in my best interest. He was a criminal acting under duress. I hid the paper under my mattress next to the pills I had not swallowed. Tonight I whispered to the empty room. I lay back and closed my eyes, visualizing the plan. I would wait until the shift change at midnight. That was when Gable went home and the night staff came on. That was when Maria started her rounds. I would make her an offer. $50,000 cash to smuggle a phone to me for 10 minutes. It was a risk. If she told Gable I would be sedated and moved to isolation permanently, I would never wake up. But looking at the crumbling ceiling, I knew I had no choice. The wolves were at the door, and the biggest wolf was my own son. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. I was Lawrence Bennett. I had built skyscrapers that withstood gale force winds. I had built bridges that carried thousands of lives. I would not let my own foundation crumble because of a gambling addict in a cheap suit. Friday was the deadline. But for Brandon, the clock stopped tonight. I waited for the sun to go down. I waited for the darkness, because in the darkness, the hunter becomes the hunted. And tonight, I was going hunting. The lights in the hallway dimmed to a low amber hum, signaling the start of the graveyard shift. The daytime noise of rattling medical carts and barking orders faded, replaced by the unsettling symphony of the night. It was a chorus of wheezing breaths, distant moans, and the rhythmic beeping of monitors keeping time for the dying. I sat in the shadows of my room waiting. I had been watching the staff rotation for 7 days. I knew that at midnight Nurse Gable with her hawk eyes and cold heart went home. Taking her place was the night crew, a skeleton staff of overworked and underpaid caretakers who spent most of their time in the break room trying to stay awake. Among them was Maria. I had observed Maria carefully. She was different from the others. She did not handle the patients like luggage. She touched them with gentle hands. She whispered apologies when she had to insert a needle. But more importantly, I had seen the cracks in her own armor. I had heard her arguing on the phone in the supply closet about payment plans and final notices. I had seen her eyes red from crying when she thought no one was looking. Desperation is a universal language, and Maria was speaking it loud and clear. Tonight, I was going to answer. I waited until 1:15 in the morning. The hallway was silent. I slid out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold linoleum. I did not need the wheelchair for this. The adrenaline coursing through my veins gave me a temporary strength that defied my age. I crept to the door and peered out. The nurse's station was empty save for Maria. She was sitting under the pool of light from a desk lamp, her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. A stack of medical bills was spread out before her. I took a deep breath. This was the most dangerous structural load I had ever calculated. If I misjudged the pressure, if she screamed, if she called security, it would all collapse. I would be sedated and I would never wake up. But I had to take the risk. I walked out of the room, my movements slow and deliberate. I made sure my slippers scuffed the floor just enough to announce my presence without startling her too much. Maria the First whispered. She jumped, nearly knocking over her cup of coffee. She spun around, her eyes wide with fear. She reached for the alarm button on the desk. "Mr. Bennett," she gasped, wiping her eyes frantically. "You scared me. You are not supposed to be out of bed. Please go back before I have to call the supervisor." I held up my hands, palms open to show I was not a threat. I took a step closer into the circle of light. "I am not going to hurt you, Maria," I said, my voice low and steady, "and I am not senile. You know that, don't you? You look at me differently than they do. You see that I am still in here." She hesitated, her hand hovering over the alarm. "I do not know what you are talking about, Mr. Bennett. Please go back to bed." I took another step. I saw the bill on top of the pile. St. Mary's Hospital. Cardiac Surgery Unit. Past due. "Your mother is sick, isn't she?" I asked softly. Maria stiffened. "That is none of your business. It is expensive." I continued, ignoring her defense. "The surgery, the recovery, the medication. A nurse's salary does not cover it. I know what it is like to watch someone you love suffer and feel helpless to stop it." Tears welled up in her eyes again, betraying her. She looked down at the bills. "I cannot talk about this with you." "I can help you, Maria," I said. "I dropped the bomb." She looked up, confused. You are a patient. You do not even have your wallet." I moved closer, leaning on the counter so our faces were inches apart. I lowered my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am Lawrence Bennett. I built half of Chicago. My son thinks he has taken everything from me. He took my cards. He took my accounts. But he didn't check the walls, Maria." She frowned. "The walls." "In the master bathroom of my house in Lake Forest," I said, lying with the conviction of a con artist. "Behind the mirror there is a loose tile. Behind that tile there is a hollow space. Inside that space is a waterproof bag containing $50,000 in cash. Emergency funds, untraceable. My son does not know it exists." Her eyes widened. $50,000. It was a fortune to her. It was freedom. It was her mother's life. I want you to have it, I said. She shook her head, backing away. No, I cannot. I could lose my job. This is crazy. You will lose your job anyway when you are too tired to work because you are worrying about your mother, I pressed. I am offering you a way out. $50,000, Maria, all yours. What do you want? She asked, her voice trembling. She was listening. The hook was set. I want one phone call, I said. That is the price. 10 minutes. Tonight. She looked at the phone on the desk, then back at me. Just a phone call. Why? Because I need to save my life, I said, looking deep into her eyes. My son is trying to kill me, Maria. Not with a gun, but with a pen. He is selling my home to pay a gambling debt, and once that is done, he will have no use for me. I need to call my lawyer. I need to stop him. She bit her lip, looking at the bills, then at the dark hallway where the supervisor might appear at any moment. The internal struggle played out on her face. Fear against hope. Duty against love. If I get caught, she whispered. You won't, I assured her. Bring your cell phone to my room at 2 a.m. I will make the call under the blanket. 10 minutes. Then you take it back. Tomorrow when my lawyer comes, he will bring the cash. I promise you on my wife's grave. She looked at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then she gave a barely perceptible nod. Go back to bed, she hissed. 2:00. I turned and shuffled back to my room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would wake the dead roommate. I climbed back into the hard bed and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. I stared at the clock on the wall. The second hand seemed to be moving through molasses. 1:45, 1:50, 1:55. Every creak of the building sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a guard. The paranoia was real, but it kept me sharp. At exactly 2:00, the door handle turned. It was a soft click. Maria slipped inside. She did not turn on the light. She moved by the glow of the moonlight filtering through the bars. She came to the side of my bed. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a smartphone. The screen was dimmed. 10 minutes, she whispered, her voice shaking. If you make a sound, I will take it back and I will deny everything. I sat up and took the phone. It felt heavy in my hand. Heavy with potential. Heavy with power. For the first time in a week, I was connected to the world again. I was not just a number in a file. I was Lawrence Bennett. I looked at Maria. Thank you, I said. You just saved 2 lives tonight. She went to the door to keep watch. I pulled the blanket over my head, creating a small tent of darkness. I unlocked the phone. The light stung my eyes. My fingers hovered over the keypad. I did not need to look up the number. I had memorized it 30 years ago. It was the number of the only man in Chicago who was as stubborn and ruthless as I was. Startled but steady, I dialed. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Answer it, Henderson, I prayed. Answer it, you old shark. The line clicked. A groggy voice rasped on the other end. Hello. Who is this calling at 2 a.m? I let out a breath that was half a sob and half a laugh. Wake up, Henderson, I whispered into the phone. It is Larry, and we are going to war. Larry, is that you? The voice on the other end was rough like sandpaper rubbing against stone. It was the voice of Robert Henderson, a man who had been my corporate counsel for 30 years and my drinking buddy for 40. He sounded groggy, but the sharpness was still there, buried under the sleep. Yes, Bob, it is me, I whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around my head to muffle the sound. I am calling from a burner phone. You have to listen carefully, because I do not have much time. There was a pause. The the sound of rustling sheets and a lamp clicking on. Jesus, Larry. I have been trying to reach you for a week. Your son sent me a letter, a formal notice of termination of counsel. He attached a medical report from Jim Evans saying you were unfit. He said you were in a vegetative state, Larry. I thought you were gone. I was going to come down there tomorrow to say goodbye. I am not gone, Bob, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and relief. I am trapped. Brandon forged the reports. He bought Jim Evans. I am being held in a place called Serenity Pines. It is not a hospital, Bob. It is a prison. They are drugging the patients to keep them quiet. I have been spitting the pills out. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. That son of a bitch, Henderson hissed. I knew it. I knew that kid was no good. He has been dodging my calls. He changed the locks on your office. Larry, tell me what you want me to do. I will have a judge sign a writ of habeas corpus by 9 a.m. I will have the police kick down the doors. We will get you out. No, I said firmly. No police, not yet. Henderson was silent for a moment. What do you mean, no police? This is kidnapping, Larry. If you call the police now, Brandon will claim it was a misunderstanding, I explained, keeping my voice low and intense. He will show them the forged medical report. He will say he was acting in my best interest. He will get a slap on the wrist, and I will still be stuck in the system. I need to destroy him, Bob. I need to make sure he never hurts anyone again. To do that, I need to know exactly what he is doing. Access the county recorder's database. Look up my property. 1402 Lakeshore Drive. Tell me what you see. I heard the sound of typing. Fast, furious typing. Henderson was wide awake now. Give me a second, he muttered. Okay, here we are. Pending transactions. Oh my God, what is it? I asked, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. He filed a rushed transfer deed yesterday. Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave. He has a buyer locked in. Larry, he is selling the estate for $3 million. $3 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. The land alone was worth 4.5. The house was a landmark. He is dumping it, I whispered. It is a fire sale. It is worse than that, Henderson continued. Look at the buyer. R&D Development Group. You know who that is, don't you? I closed my eyes. I felt a wave of nausea. I knew exactly who that was. Dominic Russo, the butcher of Lake Forest. He was a developer with ties to organized crime. He did not build homes. He bought historic properties, razed them to the ground, and built cheap, ugly condos, or paved them over for strip malls. He is selling to Russo, I said, the bitterness coating my tongue. He is going to let Russo bulldoze Catherine's rose garden. He is going to let him tear down the oak staircase I carved by hand. He is desperate, Larry Henderson said. A sale like this usually takes months. He is pushing it through in 48 hours. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. at the downtown notary office. Larry, we have to file an injunction. I can stop this. I can freeze the assets right now. No, I said again. Henderson paused. Larry, are you listening to me? We can stop him. If Russo signs that deed, you lose the house. I took a deep breath. The air under the blanket was hot and stifling, but my mind was cold as ice. If we stop him now, he just owes money, I said. Being in debt is not a crime, Bob. Being a bad son is not a crime. If we stop the sale, he walks away. He finds another way to hurt me. He finds another way to pay his gambling debts. I need him to cross the line. I need him to commit a felony that puts him away for 10 years. So what are you saying? Henderson asked, his voice wary. Let him sell it, I said. Let him sign the papers. Let him take Russo's money. Let him think he has won. But the house, Henderson protested. You will lose the house. No, I won't, I said. Do you remember 1998, Bob? Do you remember the trust we set up when Catherine got sick? The one we buried deep in the archives because we thought we would never need it. There was a long silence on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Henderson's brilliant legal mind. The Catherine Bennett Irrevocable Land Trust. Henderson whispered, "I haven't thought about that in 20 years. Find it," I commanded. "Dust it off. Bring the original certified copy to the notary office tomorrow." Larry Henderson's voice was filled with a sudden dawn of understanding and a touch of fear. "That trust separates the land rights from the structure. If he sells the house without the land lease—" "Exactly," I cut in. "If he sells the house without the land lease, he is selling a pile of bricks on property he does not own. It is fraud. Grand larceny. And since he is selling to Russo, he is defrauding the mob. He will not just go to prison, Bob. He will be destroyed." "It is a nuclear option," Larry Henderson said quietly. "There is no coming back from this. He is your son." I closed my eyes. I saw Brandon's face as he forged the medical report. I saw Tiffany throwing Catherine's photo into the trash. "I have no son," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I have a guardian who put me in a cage. Be at the notary office tomorrow, Bob, 1 p.m. Do not interfere until the ink is dry. Wait until the money transfers. Then drop the hammer." "I understand," Henderson said. "I will be there. And Larry, hang in there. We are coming for you." I hung up. I lay there in the darkness, my chest heaving. The call had lasted exactly 8 minutes. I pushed the blanket down and took a gulp of the stale air. The door handle turned again. Maria slipped back in. She looked terrified. "Did you do it?" she whispered. I handed the phone back to her. "It is done," I said. "You will have your money tomorrow, Maria." She took the phone and hid it in her pocket. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and awe. "Who are you?" she asked. I lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling. "I am a man who just demolished his own family to save his soul," I said softly. "Now go, before they see you." She slipped out, leaving me alone in the silence. But the silence was different now. It was not the silence of despair. It was the silence before a storm. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I visualized the notary office. I visualized the look on Brandon's face. I visualized the fall of the gavel. Tomorrow, the prey would walk into the trap, and I would be there to spring it. The morning sun filtered through the bars of my window, but it brought no warmth to the room. I had spent the last few hours preparing for the performance of a lifetime. I had deliberately messed up my hair. I had rubbed my eyes until they were red and rimmed with irritation. I had even allowed a small stain of oatmeal to remain on the collar of my hospital gown. To the outside world, I needed to look like a man who had completely surrendered to the decay of his own mind. I sat on the edge of the bed, rocking back and forth, slightly humming a tune that did not exist. I was channeling every broken man I had ever seen. I was becoming the victim my son needed me to be. At 10 in the morning, the door flew open. Brandon marched in. He looked worse than I did. His designer suit was wrinkled as if he had slept in it. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and terror. He smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He simply kicked the door shut behind him and pulled a chair over, scraping it loudly across the floor. He sat down inches from my face, invading my personal space with an aggressive energy that made my skin crawl. "Dad, listen to me." He started, his voice hoarse. "We have a change of plans. I need you to sign this power of attorney form right now. It gives me full authority to sign the closing documents on your behalf. I am going to handle the sale alone this afternoon. You are going to stay here." He thrust a clipboard into my hands. The pen was already clicked open. "Just sign it," he snapped. "I do not have time for games today." I looked at the paper. It was a full, durable power of attorney. If I signed this, he could sell the house without me ever leaving this room. He could take the money and disappear. And I would be left here rotting in Serenity Pines with no recourse and no way to prove the fraud. My plan relied on one crucial element. I had to be there. I had to be in the room with the buyer. I had to let the trap snap shut in public. I let my hands shake violently. The clipboard rattled against my knees. I looked up at him with wide, watery eyes. I let my lower lip tremble. "I cannot do it, Brandon," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I cannot hold the pen. My hands! Look at my hands!" He grabbed my hand and forced the pen into my fingers, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Stop acting like a baby. You signed the admission papers just fine last week. Sign the damn paper." I dropped the pen. It clattered to the floor, rolling under the bed. I started to cry. It was not difficult. I thought about Catherine. I thought about the rose garden he was about to destroy. I thought about the betrayal. The tears that rolled down my cheeks were real, even if the reason for them was calculated. "Please, son," I sobbed, hunching my shoulders to make myself look smaller. "Do not make me do this here. Not in this room. It smells like death in here, Brandon. I feel like I am suffocating." Brandon groaned, running a hand through his hair. He stood up and paced the small room like a caged tiger. "I do not care how you feel, Dad. I need this done. I have a deadline. Do you understand? People are waiting." I looked up at him, wiping my nose on my sleeve. "I will sign it." I promised, my voice trembling. "I want to help you, Brandon. I know you are in trouble. I can see it in your face." He stopped pacing. He looked at me sharply. "What do you mean you know I am in trouble?" "I am your father," I said softly, playing the emotional card. "I know when my boy is stressed. I want to give you the house. I want you to be happy. But please, Brandon, grant an old man one last wish." He stared at me, suspicious, but listening. "What wish? Take me with you," I begged, reaching out to grasp the hem of his jacket. "Take me to the office. Let me wear my suit. Let me stand up and sign the papers like a man. I have spent 40 years building a reputation in this city. If I sell my home, I want to do it with dignity. I do not want to sign my life away in a hospital gown sitting next to a dying man. Please, son, just give me my dignity for 1 hour. Then I will come back here. I will never ask you for anything again." Brandon looked down at me. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He was impatient. He wanted the easy way out. But he also saw a pathetic, broken old man begging for a crumb of respect. He looked at my shaking hands. He looked at the oatmeal on my collar. He calculated the risk. In his mind, I was medicated. I was weak. I was harmless. And there was something else. I could see it in his face. If he brought me to the closing, if I signed the papers in person in front of Russo and the notary, it would make the sale ironclad. No one could ever claim later that he had coerced me or forged my signature. Having the owner present was the ultimate validation. It would make his buyer feel safer. He checked his watch. He bit his lip. "You promise you will behave?" he asked, his voice low. "You promise you won't make a scene? You just sign the papers, shake hands, and we leave." I nodded vigorously, clasping my hands together in a gesture of gratitude. "I promise. I just want to see the sky. I just want to feel like Lawrence Bennett one last time." He exhaled a long breath. "Fine." I slumped back against the pillows, hiding the surge of triumph that threatened to show on my face. "Get cleaned up," he ordered, looking at me with disgust. "I will tell the nurses to get your suit from storage. I will pick you up at noon. But listen to me, old man. If you say one word out of line, if you hesitate for 1 second, I will bring you back here and I will have them put you in the isolation ward permanently. You will never see the sun again. Do you understand me?" "I understand, son," I whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for this." He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as the latch clicked, I stopped crying. I sat up straight. I wiped the tears from my face with a steady hand. The trap was set. He had taken the bait. He thought he was doing me a favor. He thought he was managing a nuisance. He had no idea that he had just agreed to transport his own executioner to the scene of the crime. I stood up and walked to the small mirror over the sink. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the redness, washing away the victim. I looked at my reflection. The eyes staring back were not the eyes of a dementia patient. They were the eyes of a structural engineer who had found the critical weakness in the building and was preparing to bring the whole thing down. I turned to the closet. Nurse Gable came in a few minutes later, carrying my gray suit, still in its plastic dry cleaning bag. She threw it on the bed. "Your son is too generous," she spat. "If it were up to me, you would stay right here." I did not answer her. I just smiled a vacuous, empty smile. She left. I began to dress. I put on the white shirt, buttoning it with precision. I pulled on the trousers. I tied my tie into a perfect Windsor knot. I put on my jacket. I reached under the mattress and pulled out the small yellow paper from the trash can. The debt collection notice. I folded it carefully and placed it in my inside breast pocket, right next to my heart. I was ready. At noon, the orderlies came to wheel me out. I let them push me. I sat slumped in the chair, my head down, playing the part until the very end. But beneath the suit, my muscles were coiled. My mind was sharp. We went out the front doors. The sunlight hit my face and I inhaled the fresh air. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like justice. Brandon's SUV was waiting at the curb. He opened the passenger door and roughly helped me in. "Remember what I said," he hissed as he buckled my seatbelt. "Mouth shut. Sign the papers. Then we are done." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the way his hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. "Yes, Brandon," I said softly. "We are almost done." He pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the highway, toward the city, toward the notary office where Henderson was waiting, toward the moment where everything would change. I looked out the window, watching the trees blur by. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had built my life on principles of honesty and hard work. My son had chosen to build his on lies and shortcuts. Today, those two foundations would collide, and only one would remain standing. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded far too cheerful for an execution. We stepped out onto the 42nd floor of a glass and steel tower in downtown Chicago. The office of the notary public was designed to intimidate. The carpets were thick enough to swallow the sound of footsteps, and the walls were lined with abstract art that cost more than most people earned in a decade. I sat slumped in my wheelchair, allowing Brandon to push me. My head lolled slightly to the side, and I kept my mouth slightly open, maintaining the facade of the vacant invalid. But behind my half-closed eyelids, my eyes were sharp. I scanned the room, noting the exits, the position of the cameras, and the faces of the enemy. We were led into a conference room that smelled of leather and expensive cologne. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. I saw the Willis Tower. I saw the bridges crossing the river. I saw the steel skeletons of buildings I had helped design. It was my city, and today I was going to defend my place in it. Seated at the head of the massive mahogany table was a man who looked like he had been carved out of rough stone. He was wide, with a neck that spilled over his collar and hands that looked like catcher's mitts. He was chewing on an unlit cigar, rolling it from one side of his mouth to the other. This was Dominic Russo, the developer, the man who turned history into parking lots. Next to him sat a nervous-looking notary, a woman with glasses who was already organizing stacks of documents. Brandon pushed me to the end of the table. "Mr. Russo," he said, his voice tight with forced bravado. "This is my father, Lawrence Bennett, the owner of the property." Russo stopped chewing the cigar. He looked me up and down with eyes that were flat and dead. He did not see a human being. He saw an obstacle that had finally been cleared. "He looks like he is already half dead," Russo grunted. "Can he even hold a pen?" "He is having a good day," Brandon assured him quickly, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. "He understands what is happening. He is ready to sign." I let out a low moan and shifted in my chair. Tiffany leaned down close to my ear. Her perfume was overpowering, a sickly sweet floral scent that made me want to gag. "Listen to me, Larry," she whispered, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "You sit here and you be a good boy. Do not embarrass us. Once this is done and we get the check, I will buy you that big flat-screen TV for your room. You can watch your game shows all day. Doesn't that sound nice?" I looked at her. I wanted to tell her that I did not watch game shows. I read architectural journals. I wanted to tell her that she was a parasite. But I just blinked and nodded slowly like a bobblehead doll. Russo laughed. A deep, gravelly sound. "Game shows. That is rich. Well, he won't be watching them in that house anymore. I have the demolition crew scheduled for Monday morning." My heart skipped a beat. Demolition. Monday. "You are tearing it down," I rasped. It was the first time I had spoken since we left the car. I did not have to fake the pain in my voice. Russo looked at me, surprised that the furniture could talk. Every inch of it pop. "That land is prime real estate. I am putting up a 12-story luxury condo complex. Underground parking. Rooftop pool. We need to dig deep for the garage, so the garden has to go first." The garden. Catherine's rose garden. The place where we had renewed our vows. The place where she had spent her final days sitting in the sun. He was going to dig it up and pour concrete over her memory. I felt a surge of rage so powerful I thought it would blow my cover. My hands gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. I had to close my eyes to stop myself from lunging across the table and strangling him. Brandon saw my reaction. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard. "Dad," he hissed. "Relax. It is just dirt." "It is not just dirt," I thought. "It is my life. And you are selling it for poker chips." "Let us get this over with," Russo said, checking his diamond-encrusted watch. "I have a tea time at 3. Where is the notary book?" The woman with the glasses cleared her throat. "We are just waiting for one more thing, sir. For a transaction of this magnitude involving a seller with..." She glanced at me delicately. "With medical complications, the law requires an independent witness, someone not related to the family, to verify that the seller is not under duress." Brandon paled. "What? You did not tell me that." "I am his guardian. My signature is enough." "It is company policy," Mr. Bennett, the notary, said firmly, "to prevent future litigation. We called for a witness from our pool, but he is running late." "We do not have time for this," Brandon shouted. His control was slipping. The deadline was Friday, but the sharks were circling now. "Just let him sign." Suddenly, the heavy oak door at the back of the room opened. "I am sorry I am late," a voice boomed. Traffic on the loop was murder. My heart soared. I knew that voice. It was a voice that had argued cases before the Supreme Court. It was a voice that could cut steel. Robert Henderson walked into the room. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Brandon's car. He carried a leather briefcase that looked as old and battered as he was. He did not look at me. He looked straight at Brandon. Brandon's jaw dropped. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Henderson," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Bennett, Henderson said smoothly, walking to the empty chair opposite Russo. I received a call from the notary service requesting an emergency witness for a high-value real estate transfer. I happened to be in the building. I volunteered. You cannot be here, Brandon yelled, pointing a shaking finger. You are fired. I fired you last week. You are biased. This is a conflict of interest. Henderson sat down and placed his briefcase on the table. He clicked the latches open. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the silent room. I was fired as your father's counsel. Yes, Henderson said calmly, which makes me a private citizen. And as a private citizen, I am perfectly eligible to serve as an independent witness. Unless, of course, you have something to hide, Mr. Bennett. Brandon turned to Russo, panic rising in his voice. Mr. Russo, tell him to leave. This man is trying to sabotage the deal. We can find someone else. We can wait. Russo looked at Brandon, then at Henderson. He narrowed his eyes. He was a predator, and he recognized another predator. He saw the way Henderson carried himself. He saw the confidence. Is he a lawyer? Russo asked, pointing his cigar at Henderson. Yes, Henderson replied. One of the best in the city, if I do say so myself. Russo grunted. Good. If a lawyer witnesses the signature, it is harder for them to sue me later. I want this bulletproof. Let him stay. But Mr. Russo, Brandon pleaded, sweat running down his face. You do not understand. Sit down, kid. Russo barked, slamming his hand on the table. The noise made the notary jump. I do not care who watches. I care about the deed. I have $3 million sitting in escrow, and I want my land. Sit down and shut up. Brandon collapsed into his chair. He looked defeated. He looked at me with eyes full of terror. He knew that Henderson being here was not a coincidence. He knew something was wrong. But he was trapped. He could not back out now without explaining to Russo why he was afraid of a witness. And he could not explain that he was committing fraud. I looked at Henderson. He gave me the slightest nod. Barely a millimeter. The air in the room grew heavy. It was electric. The tension was so thick I could taste it. It tasted like ozone before a lightning strike. The notary pushed the stack of papers toward me. Mr. Bennett, she said, her voice trembling slightly. If you are ready, please sign on the lines marked with an X. I looked at the papers. I looked at Brandon, who was chewing his fingernails. I looked at Russo, who was already mentally counting his profits. And I looked at Tiffany, who was scrolling on her phone, bored by the drama. They all thought this was the end. They thought I was signing my surrender. I reached out with a shaky hand and took the pen. I am ready, I whispered. But I was not signing a surrender. I was signing a declaration of war. The heavy bond paper of the sales contract lay before me on the mahogany table. It was thick and creamy white, the kind of paper used for treaties and surrenders. To everyone else in the room, it looked like the end of Lawrence Bennett, but to me it looked like the trigger of a trap that I had spent the last 24 hours carefully setting. The air in the room was stifling hot, not because of the temperature, but because of the sheer desperation radiating from my son. Brandon was sitting next to me, and he was practically vibrating. His knee was bouncing up and down under the table, creating a low, rhythmic thudding sound that betrayed his terror. I could smell him. It was the sour, metallic scent of fear mixed with cheap cologne. He checked his watch for the 10th time in 2 minutes. I knew exactly what he was looking at. It was 12:55. The deadline for his debt repayment was likely 1 o'clock. Every second that ticked by on the expensive clock on the wall was bringing him closer to a violent end at the hands of the loan sharks. He needed that wire transfer to hit his account before the hour struck, or he was a dead man walking. I reached out for the pen the notary was holding out to me. My hand trembled violently. I made sure of it. I let my fingers spasm so that I fumbled the pen, dropping it onto the glossy surface of the table with a clatter. Oops, I mumbled, my voice sounding thick and confused. My fingers. They do not work like they used to. Jesus Christ, Dad. Pick it up, Brandon hissed. He grabbed the pen and shoved it back into my hand, squeezing my fingers around the barrel until it hurt. Just hold it tight. Put the tip on the line. Right there. The line with the X. I looked at the line. Then I looked up at the notary. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who looked uncomfortable with Brandon's aggression. "Excuse me, miss," I said, blinking slowly. "Is there going to be lunch? I usually have my soup at this time. Tomato soup. With crackers." Brandon slammed his hand onto the table, making Tiffany jump. "Dad, stop talking about soup. Sign the paper. We will get you soup later. We will buy you a whole restaurant. Just sign your name." I looked at him with wide, hurt eyes. "Why are you yelling, Brandon? You used to be such a sweet boy. Remember when we went fishing at the lake? You caught a sunfish." Brandon looked like he was about to have a stroke. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. "That was 30 years ago. Sign the damn paper or I swear to God I will leave you here." Russo the buyer let out a grunt of impatience. He took the unlit cigar out of his mouth and pointed it at Brandon. "Hey kid," he growled. "If your old man is too far gone to sign, maybe we should call this off. I do not have all day to watch a puppet show. I have a demolition crew to schedule." "No, Mr. Russo," Brandon stammered, panic making his voice squeak. "He is fine. He is just slow. Watch. He is doing it now." He turned to me, his eyes pleading and full of malice at the same time. "Please, Dad. For me. Just write Lawrence Bennett. That is all you have to do." I looked at Henderson sitting across the table. My lawyer kept his face completely neutral, but I saw a tiny flicker of amusement in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was doing. I was stretching the rubber band until it was ready to snap. I leaned forward over the document. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink bled slightly into the fiber. I started to write. I wrote the L slowly, then the A. I paused. I looked up at the ceiling as if trying to remember the rest of my own name. W. Brandon whispered, coaching me like a toddler. "W comes next, Dad." I wrote the W. Then the R. I took my time forming every letter, making the lines shaky and uneven. The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone was holding their breath. Tiffany was leaning forward, her eyes glued to the pen, greedy anticipation written all over her face. She was already spending the money in her head. I finished the last T. I lifted the pen. "There," I said, letting out a long sigh. "Is that good?" "Perfect," Brandon breathed. He snatched the paper away from me before I could blink. He slid it across the table to the notary. "Stamp it. Hurry." The notary checked the signature. She nodded. She picked up her heavy seal and pressed it down. Ka-chunk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "It is done," she said. "The deed is transferred." Russo grinned a predatory smile that showed his yellowed teeth. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "Funds are released," he said. $3 million. Enjoy it, kid." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Brandon stared at his phone lying on the table. He was sweating so much, a drop rolled down his nose and hit the glass screen. Then it happened. Ping. A notification popped up. Then another. Ping. Ping. Brandon grabbed the phone. He unlocked it with trembling fingers. He stared at the banking app. His knees buckled and he slumped back into his chair, laughing hysterically. It was the laugh of a man who had just stepped off the gallows. "It is there," he gasped, looking at Tiffany. "It is all there. $3 million. We are rich, Tiff. We are saved." Tiffany squealed and threw her arms around him, kissing his sweaty face. "Oh, baby, I knew you could do it. We are going to Paris. We are going to buy the penthouse." Russo stood up, buttoning his massive suit jacket. He looked at me with contempt. "Pleasure doing business, Mr. Bennett," he said to me. "Or I guess I should say goodbye. My guys will be at the house on Monday morning to start tearing it down. You have 24 hours to get your junk out of there." Brandon stood up, grinning at me. "Don't worry, Mr. Russo. We will handle the old man. Come on, Dad, let's go get you that soup. Or maybe we will just take you straight back to the home. You look tired." He reached for the handles of my wheelchair. I planted my feet on the floor. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. My grip was not the weak grip of a senile old man. It was the iron grip of a construction worker. Brandon froze. He looked down at my hand, then at my face. I let the slack jaw tighten. I straightened my spine, sitting up tall in the chair. The vacant look in my eyes vanished, replaced by a gaze of cold, hard steel. "Take your hands off me," I said. My voice was clear, deep and resonant, filling the room. The laughter stopped. Tiffany pulled away from Brandon. Russo stopped halfway to the door. "What did you say?" Brandon whispered, confusion clouding his face. I stood up. I did not struggle. I did not wobble. I stood up smoothly and brushed the invisible dust from my suit jacket. I walked over to the table and picked up the pen I had supposedly been unable to hold. I capped it with a sharp click. I said, "Take your hands off me," I repeated, turning to face the room. "And sit down, Brandon. We are not going anywhere." "What is going on?" Russo barked, stepping back to the table. "I thought you said he was demented." I looked at Russo. "I am as sane as you are, Mr. Russo," I said coolly. "Probably saner since you just paid $3 million for a pile of bricks you cannot use." Brandon looked at his phone, then at me. "Dad, what are you talking about? The deal is done. The money is in my account. You signed it." "Yes, I signed it," I said, walking around the table until I stood next to Henderson. "I sold you the house, the structure, the walls, the roof. But you boys were in such a rush you forgot the first rule of real estate. Always check the survey." Henderson opened his briefcase. He pulled out a document that was yellowed with age, protected by a plastic sleeve. He slid it across the polished table. "Gentleman," Henderson said, his voice booming. "This is the Catherine Bennett Irrevocable Land Trust, dated 1998. I watched their faces as the reality hit them. "You see," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. 20 years ago, my wife and I separated the land rights from the house rights to protect the estate from developers like you. I own the house, but the land underneath it belongs to a Nature Conservancy Trust. And there is a clause, a very specific clause." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table, staring directly into Brandon's terrified eyes. "The clause states that if the residential structure is sold to any commercial entity or for any purpose other than a single-family home, the ground lease is immediately terminated. The owner of the structure, that is you, now Mr. Russo, has 48 hours to remove the structure from the land." "Remove the structure?" Russo stammered, his face turning purple. "You mean—" "I mean move the house," I said, smiling coldly. "Pick it up and move it. Because if it is still on that land by Monday morning, the trust seizes it for demolition at your expense." The room went deadly silent. Brandon looked at his phone where the $3 million sat. Then he looked at Russo. Russo's face went from purple to white. He realized what had happened. He had bought a house he could not keep on land he did not own. He had been tricked. "You old son of a bitch," Russo roared, lunging toward me. But I did not flinch, because the dominoes were just starting to fall. "And Brandon," I said, turning to my son, who was shaking like a leaf, "before Mr. Russo kills you for losing his money, you might want to look at the door. Because the FBI has been very interested in why a developer with mob ties just wired $3 million to a man with a gambling debt." As if on cue, sirens began to wail from the street below. I looked at my son. "The game is over," I said, "and you lost." Henderson reached into his battered leather briefcase, and the sound of the brass latches snapping open seemed to echo like thunder in the silent room. He pulled out a thick folder that smelled of dust and old paper. The edges were frayed, and the cover was a faded manila yellow that stood in stark contrast to the crisp white pages of the fraudulent contract Brandon had just forced me to sign. Henderson slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of Russo, who was staring at it with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. "This is the Catherine Bennett Irrevocable Land Trust," Henderson said, his voice calm and professional, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "It was established in 1998 by my client and his late wife. It is a matter of public record if you had bothered to do a title search instead of rushing a fire sale in 48 hours. Russo snatched the folder up. His thick fingers fumbled with the pages. "What is this garbage?" he growled. "I have the deed. I have the signature. The deal is done." "The deal is done regarding the residential structure," I said, stepping forward. I spoke slowly, enjoying every syllable. "I am a structural engineer, Mr. Russo. I spent my life calculating loads and stresses. And the first rule of engineering is that the foundation is more important than the building. You see, back in '98, when my wife got sick, we wanted to ensure that no developer could ever destroy her garden. So we severed the estate." I pointed to the yellowed document in Russo's hand. "That document states that the land, the soil, the dirt under the house belongs to the Northern Illinois Nature Conservancy. I only retained ownership of the bricks and the wood. And I only retained the right to lease the land as long as the property remained a single-family residence occupied by a Bennett." Russo's face began to turn a deep shade of crimson. He looked from the paper to me, then to Brandon. "What does that mean?" he barked. "It means," Henderson interjected, leaning back in his chair, with a satisfied smile, "that the moment you signed that purchase agreement with the intent to develop commercial condos, you triggered the termination clause. Clause 14, Section B. Look at it." Russo ripped through the pages until he found the spot. His eyes scanned the text, and I watched the blood drain from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. "It says here," Henderson recited from memory, "that upon termination of the ground lease, the owner of the structure has exactly 24 hours to remove said structure from the land. Failure to remove the structure will result in the trust seizing the asset for demolition at the owner's expense." The room went deadly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "You bought a house, Mr. Russo," I said, my voice low and hard. "But you did not buy the land it sits on. And since you cannot build condos on land you do not own, you have a problem. You have exactly 24 hours to pick up a 4,000 square foot brick mansion and move it somewhere else. If you don't, the Conservancy will knock it down and bill you for the wrecking ball. You just paid $3 million for a pile of bricks that you have to pay to throw away." Brandon was staring at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Dad," he whispered, "you cannot do this. The money, it is already in my account." Russo dropped the folder. It hit the table with a heavy thud. He slowly turned his head toward Brandon. The veins in his thick neck were bulging. The predator had been tricked, and now he was looking for something to kill. "You knew about this," Russo hissed. His voice was a low rumble of pure violence. "You set me up, you little rat. You sold me air." No, I swear," Brandon stammered, backing away, his hands raised in surrender. "I did not know, he never told me. I thought the title was clean." "Mr. Russo, please, we can fix this." "Fix it," Russo roared. He lunged across the space between them. He grabbed Brandon by the lapels of his expensive Italian suit and slammed him against the glass wall of the conference room. The glass shuddered under the impact. "Give me my money back," Russo screamed, spraying spittle into Brandon's terrified face. "Transfer it back right now or I will throw you out this window." "I cannot," Brandon choked, clawing at Russo's massive hands. "I cannot. It is already pending. The bank locked it. I stood there watching my son being throttled by the monster he had invited into our lives. Tiffany was screaming, huddled in the corner, clutching her designer bag as if it could protect her from the violence. The notary was frantically dialing security on the wall phone. But I was not done. The trap had one more jaw to snap shut. "Mr. Russo," I called out calmly. My voice cut through the chaos. "I would not worry about the money if I were you. You are not going to be able to spend it where you are going." Russo froze. He did not let go of Brandon, but he turned to look at me. "What are you talking about, old man?" I pulled out my phone. The same phone Maria had smuggled to me. I held it up. "You see, Brandon was in such a rush to pay off his gambling debts that he forgot about banking regulations," I said. A $3 million wire transfer to a personal account, followed immediately by a transfer to an offshore shell company linked to an illegal casino, triggers a lot of red flags, especially when the account holder has been reported for elder abuse and fraud. Brandon's eyes went wide. He stopped struggling. "I called the FBI this morning, son," I said, looking at him with pity and disgust. "I told them everything. I told them about the forged medical records. I told them about the nursing home imprisonment. And I told them that Dominic Russo, known associate of the Chicago outfit, was laundering money through a fraudulent real estate deal." Russo let go of Brandon. Brandon slid down the glass wall to the floor, gasping for air. "You called the feds," Russo whispered. The color was gone from his face now. He looked at the door. "That is why I insisted on coming here," I said. "I needed you both in the same room. I needed the money to change hands." Once that transfer hit Brandon's account, the crime was complete. Money laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy. I walked over to the window and looked down at the street below. "If you look down," I said, "you will see that the traffic has stopped. Those black SUVs down there are not waiting for a parade." Oh. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors of the conference room burst open. "FBI, nobody move!" a voice shouted. A dozen agents in tactical gear poured into the room, weapons drawn. The chaotic energy of the violence was instantly replaced by the cold precision of law enforcement. "Hands in the air. Get on the ground. Now." Russo raised his hands slowly, a look of pure hatred burning in his eyes as he stared at me. He knew he was finished. The land fraud was a civil matter, but the money laundering was federal. He was looking at 20 years. Brandon was sobbing on the floor, curled into a fetal position. He looked up at me as an agent grabbed his arm and hauled him up. "Dad," he cried. "Dad, please, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy who had sold me for a gambling debt. I walked over to him. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. "My son died the day he put me in that cage," I whispered. "You are just a stranger who broke into my house." The agent slapped the handcuffs on Brandon's wrists. The metallic click was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a heavy load finally being lifted. It was the sound of my foundation settling back into place. I turned to Henderson, who was calmly packing his briefcase amidst the chaos. "Ready to go, Bob?" I asked. Henderson smiled. "I think we have some soup to get, Larry." I walked out of that room, leaving the shouting and the crying behind me. I did not look back. I wheeled myself to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside. I was not an old man in a wheelchair anymore. I was Lawrence Bennett, and I was going home. The chaos of the arrest spilled out onto the sidewalk of downtown Chicago. It was a spectacle of flashing blue lights and shouting voices that drew a crowd of curious onlookers. I rolled my wheelchair out of the building with Henderson walking beside me. The cool air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal on my chest. I felt light. I felt clean. I watched as the agents marched Brandon out of the revolving doors. His expensive suit was torn at the shoulder, and his hands were cuffed behind his back. He was no longer the arrogant man who had thrown me into a van. He was a weeping child. When he saw me, he tried to lunge forward, but the agents held him back. "Dad," he screamed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "Dad, please do not let them take me. I am your son. You cannot let me go to prison. I will pay it back. I swear I will pay it back." I signaled for Henderson to stop the chair. I looked at my son. I looked at him for a long time, remembering the day he was born, remembering the day he graduated college. I realized that the boy in my memories had died a long time ago. The man in front of me was a stranger, a parasite who had fed on my love until there was nothing left but bone. "I taught you how to build bridges." "Brandon," I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing. "I taught you how to calculate risk. I taught you how to make money. But I forgot the most important lesson. I forgot to teach you how to be a human being." "Dad, please," he wailed. I shook my head slowly. "You wanted a quick payout, son. Well, you got one. This lesson cost $3 million and your freedom. I hope you learn it in your cell because you certainly did not learn it in my house." The agents pushed him toward the waiting cruiser. As they shoved him into the back seat, he looked at me one last time with eyes full of hatred. The door slammed shut, sealing his fate. Then came Tiffany. She was not crying. She was screaming. She was kicking at the female officer who was guiding her toward a separate car. "I did not do anything," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "I just spent the money. I did not sign the papers. You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here." The officer stopped and looked at her. "Ma'am, you are being charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, and thanks to a brave young nurse named Maria, we also have audio recordings of you instructing staff to withhold food and medication from Mr. Bennett. That is felony elder abuse. You are looking at 10 years. Tiffany went silent. She looked over at me. I raised my hand and gave her a small, polite wave. The color drained from her face as she realized that her days of pearl necklaces and country clubs were over. She slumped against the car, defeated. Finally, they brought out Russo. He did not scream. He did not beg. He walked with his head down, knowing that he had lost the game. He glared at me as he passed, but he said nothing. He knew that if he spoke, he would only dig his grave deeper. "It is over," Henderson said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "They are gone, Larry." I took a deep breath, inhaling the exhaust fumes and the city grit. It smelled like perfume to me. "Take me home, Bob," I said. "Take me to my garden." 2 hours later, I was sitting on the back porch of my house in Lake Forest. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the rose bushes that Catherine had planted. They were still there. No bulldozers, no concrete, just the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. I heard the sliding glass door open behind me. Maria walked out carrying a tray with a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir and 2 glasses. She had arrived an hour ago, still wearing her scrubs, looking terrified and hopeful. I had kept my promise. I had given her the $50,000. But I had given her something more. I fired the old housekeeping staff, I told her as she set the tray down. They were loyal to Brandon, not to me. I need someone I can trust to run this place. I need someone who knows the value of family. The job pays double what you made at the nursing home, and you can bring your mother here to recover in the guest wing. She had cried then. Real tears. Tears of relief. Now she poured the wine, her hands steady. She handed me a glass. "To new beginnings, Mr. Bennett," she said softly. I took the glass. "To the truth, Maria," I corrected her. "And please call me Larry." She smiled and went back inside, leaving me alone with the sunset. I took a sip of the wine. It was rich and complex, with notes of dark cherry and oak. It tasted like life. I looked out at the garden at the empty chair beside me where Catherine used to sit. I missed her. I missed the family I thought I had. But as the fireflies began to dance in the twilight, I realized something profound. People say that blood is thicker than water. They use it as an excuse to forgive abuse, to tolerate disrespect, to keep toxic people in their lives just because they share a last name. But they are wrong. Sometimes blood is poison. Sometimes the family you are born into is the anchor that drowns you, and the strangers you meet along the way are the life rafts that save you. I had lost a son today, a biological son. But I had found my dignity. I had found my strength. I had found a daughter in a nurse who barely knew me. I looked at my reflection in the wine glass. I saw an old man, yes, but I saw a survivor. I saw a man who refused to go gently into that good night. I took another sip and closed my eyes, listening to the wind in the trees. The house was quiet. No arguments, no lies, no schemes, just peace. Tonight, for the first time in years, I was going to sleep without locking my bedroom door. And it was going to be the best sleep of my life. Here is the lesson I want you to take from my story. Never let anyone tell you that you are powerless because of your age or your situation. Predators look for weakness, but they often mistake kindness for weakness. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is wrong. And remember that you have the right to protect yourself and your legacy, even if the person trying to take it from you is your own flesh and blood. Respect is earned, not inherited. If someone treats you like an ATM machine, they do not love you, they are using you. Close the account and change the locks. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear it. Maybe it will help someone else spot the cracks in their own foundation before it is too late. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are the architect of your own life. Do not let anyone else hold the pen. See you in the next story.